Hello and welcome to our webinar entitled Re-Engineering Business Operations in the Post-Pandemic Future. Today, we'll be exploring how digital transformation will help manufacturers and distributors to think forward. With that, let me hand over to our moderator for today's session.
Hi everyone, my name is Darren Edwards and I'm the Sales Enablement Manager at SYSPRO Global. And today I'll be your host for this webinar. And today we'll be discussing the impact and the business trends now emerging from the pandemic. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel for today's SYSPRO webinar. We have Cindy Jutras. Welcome, Cindy. She's an industry expert in enterprise software solutions for the manufacturing and distribution industries. She's a technology industry analyst who specializes on the impact of enterprise applications on business performance. And Cindy has over 40 years worth of corporate experience and considerable experience within manufacturing, supply chain, customer service, and business performance management, not to mention improvement. And I'm really excited to have Cindy with us today.
Thanks very much, Darren. Nice to be here.
And joining Cindy today, we have Paolo Di Matos, our Global Chief Product Officer at SYSPRO. Paolo has over 25 years worth of experience in the ERP space and has made a significant impact in the areas of SYSPRO sales and product development. Paolo is not only a product and sales legend, he's also an industry expert who's passionate about making sure that SYSPRO are developing the right ERP solution capabilities. Welcome, Paolo.
Thanks, Darren. It's great to be here.
And also last, but certainly not least, joining our discussion panel today is Laura Ramsey. Laura is the Vice President of Marketing for SYSPRO Canada, where she's responsible for marketing strategy, demand generation, branding, communications, and content. It's great to hear from you again, Laura.
Thanks, Darren. Glad to be here.
Okay, so let's get right down to it. So in 2020, as we know, the world experienced unprecedented disruption in most industries. And amid the pandemic, the world could not afford for manufacturing and distribution to simply grind to a halt. From food on our shelves to medical necessities such as PPE, some sectors at the heart of our economy needed to keep going no matter the cost. And as COVID-19 lockdowns now begin to ease in some areas across the globe, manufacturers and distributors have started to analyse the impact. This in a bid to understand what it means to them. And now they're starting to recognise how urgently they need to adjust their operating strategies to ensure that future stability. So in order for them not just to survive this pandemic, but thrive, businesses need to accelerate changes to their operational strategies and put significant investment into their digital transformation efforts. So today we're going to be deep diving into research that SYSPRO has conducted into the long-term impact of the pandemic on manufacturers and distributors, and our panel of experts we have today will then weigh in on the role of digital transformation in overcoming disruptions to ensure business resiliency. So to kick things off, let's look a little more closely at the longer term impact of the pandemic on global manufacturing and distribution industries. Paolo, SYSPRO conducted research into business resiliency during the pandemic. Can you explain to us a little about the research and its outputs, and perhaps tell us how ready you think businesses may have been for this challenge?
Yes, Darren. So in order to understand how manufacturers and distributors have handled the pandemic, we produced and launched an online survey, which we shared with the industry professionals across different managerial levels across the globe. The survey was directed to both office workers as well as operational workers in departments, and we had responses from numerous operational areas on the value chain, such as operations, the Office of Finance, IT, logistics, marketing, and sales. A significant proportion of those responses that we received was directly from top-tier business decision makers. In fact, over 55% were in a senior management, executive, or business owner role, which we were really pleased with. If we have a look at the departments, we can also understand that it's pretty normal for us to receive a higher proportion in operations and Office of Finance, and likewise IT, because those typically are the three departments that are primarily involved in managing, selecting, and maintaining their business platform, their ERP solution of choice. 73% of the respondents, a significant proportion of the industry responses, were in fact industries that SYSPRO primarily services. And this is in the manufacture and in the distribution of goods. Just to point out some of the other demographics, 70% of the organizations, most of them had already had to deal with the complexity of operations across multiple geographies. So any impact that the pandemic would have in a localized area or at a regional level, they would certainly feel those impacts. 40% of the organizations also stated that they had a significant reliance on outsourced supply chain in the areas of operations or subcontracted operations. And these were key indicators that we were talking to the exact group of people that we expected there to have been an impact and a disruption to their business. What we found is the key issues that emerged and points of vulnerability, and these included the inefficiencies of the current business systems that these organizations utilized, and that left manufacturers in an extremely vulnerable position. Secondly, the brittleness of the supply chain. And we're going to be expanding a lot more into the reasons for this and also the mitigation factors moving forward. And thirdly, the impact of a newly forged remote workforce. And that was something that every organization needed to deal with uniformly.
So thanks, Paolo. Those are some great demographics. Laura, so I suppose that sets the scene for the type of people that engaged in the survey. What did they say was the impact of the pandemic on their business?
Yeah, for sure. The findings of the survey were really interesting, to say the least. The global supply chain, as you know, is usually a well-oiled machine, but disruption became the new reality, and many businesses just weren't prepared. So within the study, 29% of businesses felt that their systems didn't provide them with the availability and accessibility to manage all of the changes introduced by the pandemic. The remote workforce is a great example. 46% felt that their systems lacked the insights they needed to be able to respond to all the changes. And about 37% agreed that their business systems lack the basic planning tools that could help them adjust to all the day-to-day changes. And about the same amount, just over a third, said that business continuity was a major issue and that their systems actually hampered their ability to adapt.
That's a lot of problems to have. So ultimately, business systems, I see, were felt to lack the availability or grant the insights and provide the planning tools that were needed by the industry to essentially react to the pandemic. Paolo, do you think that would have resulted in a proportion of those manufacturers and distributors from them being at risk of collapse through insolvency?
I think that's a really good question. And as you can see, 23% of the industry expected a loss of customers due to their inability to fulfill customer demands. But maybe they have been quick enough to react to save on cash flow issues by beginning to adopt emerging technologies and specifically looking at initiatives such as Industry 4.0 to help remain agile in the face of disruption.
So since the pandemic, the shift everyone seems to be talking about is the new normal of a remote workforce. So what about it? For me, leading up to 2020, many companies actually prohibited employees from working from home or remotely, as they saw it as just too high a risk to productivity and quality. So besides the cultural change factor, I would guess that employees also probably didn't have access to the right technologies to enable remote working. Yeah, of course, unless you're making knitted jumpers, you can't manufacture and distribute from home. Paolo, what did your respondents have to say about being able to work remotely?
Well, as you suspected, our survey revealed some real industry challenges. At the core of it, 37% of the companies stated that they were unable to provide the remote working capabilities to employees that were needed at that time. This included back office positions, such as administrative functions, as well as the front-end operational workers. Additionally, the survey also showed that 19% of the businesses could not perform their administrative functions remotely. In fact, one of the biggest areas that was impacted was the payroll function, where manual processes still play a huge role in month-end processes. So if there was anything that would actually highlight an inefficiency with a mix of automated, manual, and siloed systems, the pandemic really brought that to the fore.
Laura, do you want to talk to us about how the respondents perhaps suggested they may work in future?
Yeah, absolutely, Darren. I think investment and adaptability are key here. Almost 3/4 of the businesses stated they would now need to invest in capabilities to facilitate remote working. And over half of the businesses said they would allow remote working and flexible working arrangements post-pandemic.
I suppose that makes sense. You either embrace the remote workforce or risk losing them, and therefore the ability to operate the business. I suppose industry is definitely destined for change, and technology, I suppose, now needs to be central in enabling this. Cindy, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do, Darren. I think that today the rules have changed. If remote working is here to stay, and I truly believe that it is, companies need to help to connect people and processes. This will require cloud computing that supports collaboration. Automation and the connectivity needed for real collaboration will go a long way to ease the burden amidst all these new restrictions and shelter-in-place orders, and even beyond that as we start to emerge and perceptions and rules and policies will change.
So the remote workforce is acting as a huge catalyst for change, but for me, equally as impacted must have been the supply chain. So let's just talk a little about the actual supply chain. Cindy, what have you witnessed from the industry?
Well, first of all, I've witnessed a lot of change. And also there's evidence that supply chains can be very fragile or, as you mentioned earlier, quite brittle. Prior to 2020, the global supply landscape was very different. The shift to more distributed environments and global trade relationships started decades ago. That was when low-cost country sources made outsourcing very appealing. With global lockdowns occurring with no forewarning, the outsourcing of operations to another country was often no longer a viable option. In some cases, the supply chain was closed down before the intended recipients of the products were even aware of the closure. In other cases, the products had to pass through countries that had closed their borders. For any number of reasons, the supply chain was broken before companies could find an alternative source.
It's certainly been a dramatic difference that this year has made to people. Paolo, what did your study tell you about disruption in the supply chain?
Well, our study supported Cindy's sentiment. Firstly, it showed that 60% of the businesses were impacted by supply chain disruptions. That's a pretty high proportion, which in turn affected the ability to supply their customers. In fact, 80% of the respondents stated they needed to consider alternate logistics and distribution systems in order to deliver and meet market requirements. So in short, we will start to see that reconfiguration of supply chains with an increased focus on resiliency, transparency, and visibility. And this is actually quite a marked departure point from how supply chains were configured of old, primarily focused on lowest cost points and economies of scale.
A reconfiguration of the supply chain, that sounds complicated. Perhaps, Paolo, you could elaborate a little bit more on that reconfiguration of the supply chain and what that entails.
Well, we do anticipate that organizations will now adopt different approaches to sourcing strategies. This will shift their focus away from cost and efficiency control towards certainty and quality. And our study showed that 42% of the respondents stated that their businesses intended to nearshore and reshore their manufacturing operations. That is a significant number. And this may be a way for businesses to shorten their supply chains, to look at how do we secure our inputs. And this obviously is to make them more flexible in the face of those unexpected changes. We do see websites now popping up in various countries as a means to help actually facilitate manufacturers to near or reshore into the future.
I certainly noticed a few of those popping up. Cindy, what are your thoughts around the rise of this reshoring talk, especially within the US where you're based?
Well, I see it starting to happen, but from my perspective, I don't really believe that reshoring will necessarily lead to the centralization of operations from a single location. Over the years, just as your survey indicated, I found distributed environments to be the norm, even without international expansion. In 2019, my surveys found that the average small manufacturer, and by small I mean with annual revenues below 25 million US dollars, that average small manufacturer had 4.43 operating locations, and the average small distributor had 7.64. And that number just grows steadily as companies continue to grow. I also suspect that reshoring efforts won't happen overnight. I mean, think about what needs to happen. It can't happen overnight. So in the meantime, many businesses could look to mitigate their risk by finding alternative sources of supply.
Yes, this was also reflected within our study, where 56% of the businesses are already investigating dual sourcing and other initiatives to reduce the supply chain risk.
So what about overall supply chain resiliency then, Paolo? You mentioned earlier that 80% of businesses would be looking to alternative systems. This would require, I suppose, a shift towards greater supply chain collaboration. What would you say should manufacturers and distributors be really thinking about in order to make the shift?
Well, for those organizations looking at dual sourcing and certainly de-risking their supply chain, there are capabilities within the procurement lifecycle that typically supports that improved supply-side collaboration. And supply-side collaboration is absolutely critical to make sure that all the market actors are engaged on the same platform. Probably the best way through illustration and example within SYSPRO supply chain portal, that platform fosters that collaboration between manufacturers, distributors, and their suppliers. It allows for the request for supply quotes to be responded to automatically and the supply performance information to be surfaced and actioned independently of the purchasing team or the supply management interventions. So this also assists with the elements such as procure to pay, supplier contract management, and even RFQ management. And these are some of the initiatives that companies should be looking at how do they get closer to their supply chain.
It seems like the bottom line here is that industry is slowly shifting to a less risky and to certainty models, which will help them avoid future disruptions, but yet still allow them to embrace these new ways of working. Laura, what about SYSPRO customers then? How did they specifically fare and handle in the pandemic?
Yeah, overall, I'd say they fared pretty well. One example I can share is about a company, one of our US-based clients, who thrived during the pandemic. So they're Ruprecht. They're a food manufacturer that specializes in ready-to-eat products for both food service and retail. So as part of their digital transformation journey, they had implemented SYSPRO 8 to take advantage of a better ease of use, higher productivity, ease of integration. But what was most impactful is that it made it easier for Ruprecht to tackle all of the market disruptions early and effectively. So they were able to leverage a combination of AI and predictive analytics within SYSPRO ERP to develop a predictive model that guided them through their decision-making processes. Another thing they did to support their digital transformation journey was set up a data warehouse structure that allows them to pull warehouse data from SYSPRO. And because SYSPRO is built on an open architecture, it gives Ruprecht the flexibility to pull data into centralized business intelligence solutions, and then they can use it in real time.
So there's no doubt that the pandemic has challenged business operations, and it seems like digital transformation strategies are key to ensure long-term supply chain resiliency. The businesses that we know and love are shifting away from the old business models, so it's absolutely critical that business systems now support the shift. So let's just weigh in on the role of of technology and how that's going to help shape the shift and how that will allow manufacturers and distributors to start thinking forward. Paolo, can you perhaps tell us what technologies you think manufacturers and distributors will be investing in, considering the shift towards remote work, reshoring, and the previously mentioned reconfiguration of supply chains?
Yes, Darren. Well, prior to the shift, manufacturing had been defined by lots of manual processes. And it is many of these inefficiencies that made them look at offshoring operations in the first while. So here we see that organizations still have manual inspections. They have lots of manual recording and intervention. And it's best described as disconnected processes. Now, some companies had also invested in best-of-breed business systems, but that you typically would find in a single cell control room. And that failed actually to connect to any of the downstream and upstream operations. Of course, with the pandemic, businesses are now looking at it and saying for business resiliency, ensuring that they can have the right level of technical investments, that they specifically are looking to secure their digital future. So what does that look like? So in the scenarios of manufacturers, it would be the adoption of robotics, ensuring that there's an integrated advanced quality control that's built into their processes, ensuring that manufacturers can improve on all of their operational efficiencies to drive better outcomes and results. Now, Laura made mention of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and here we also see a huge trend, but it's there to specifically fill a purpose, and that purpose is to ensure that any operator, any work at any level has got the full information at his disposal. He'll receive the identified trends, he'll get his predictions, he'll be able to identify anomalies to support them in more efficient decision making. So this is also a huge opportunity presented by, for example, other emerging technologies like chatbots or the use of digital citizens to solve most customer service issues on their own. Big data and analytics also provides the insights for better decision making and making use of that connected environment directly with sensors, IoT, IIoT, and this, we're looking to connect and digitalize those processes. By doing so, we will remove the inefficiencies and ensure that profitability and the efficiencies are produced correctly right off the bat.
Sounds great. Do you have any thoughts on this, Cindy?
Yes, I would echo some of the sentiments that Paulo just mentioned. It's evident that the greatest value of digital lies in its ability to connect people, devices, processes, and data. And this is all for faster and better decision making. As business models shift, and they are shifting, it's vital for manufacturers to consider the role of devices, digital citizens, supply chain portals, integration services, and connectors as they become integrated or even embedded within a variety of applications.
You mentioned business models there, Cindy. Let's just turn our attention to those business models. Laura, are manufacturers and distributors looking to explore new opportunities now for revenue post the pandemic?
Oh, definitely. The study actually showed that 80% of B2B leaders will retain new digital selling models after the pandemic. And 2/3 of them said that they believe that e-commerce solutions are essential. And we're definitely seeing that. So, and we saw it a lot with our customers as well. During the national lockdown last year, one of our customers in Africa, that is a beverage wholesaler, took the opportunity to scale up and offer customers their products directly through an existing e-commerce site so that they didn't need to build a whole new website on their own. And what happened was pretty remarkable. In a matter of days, they moved from hundreds of orders a day to over thousands. So by integrating an API into their ERP system, the wholesaler could essentially expand their supply chain outside of their business. So Paulo, I think we agree that we're definitely seeing a move to automation, aren't we?
Absolutely. Before the pandemic, 55% of the businesses were dependent on in-person selling. Before the pandemic, and that number is now down to 21%. So we do see a shift in the paradigm in the way that businesses are dealing with customers and how they are looking to engage with them. In the past, where it was really about that in-person selling, that customer journey is now shifting to digital platforms.
So if I can just summarize, this is also where digital transformation technologies are vital. The pandemic has pushed many in the direction of e-commerce. For some, it was a brand new direction. For others, it was simply accelerating where they were headed anyway. But e-commerce has become a lifeline for many businesses. In order to make this a reality, manufacturers and distributors are shifting their preference toward a cloud-deployed solution, not only to address immediate needs, but as a catalyst to accelerate the digital transformation journey.
So if business models are becoming more digital, as we've established, Laura, do you have any examples of perhaps some new digital channels that a business should be looking to explore?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say there's a few worth looking into. So CRM, or customer relation management, I think is really essential to understand the complete customer journey. So this includes not only managing relationships with your customers, but also with your suppliers. Channels such as self-service portals that can be used to facilitate RFQs and procurement would allow your customers to review also their invoices and statements. We've talked a lot about e-commerce. So manufacturers can look into plugging in APIs to expand their supply chain. Wholesale manufacturers, for example, typically sell products to retailers who then sell them directly to consumers. But in order to meet the new consumer demand, many manufacturers have opted to turn that on its head, and they're incorporating a retail model and selling directly to the public. I think what's important is that to know is that you don't actually need to build a whole new website to do this. To save costs and increase your time to market, manufacturers are leveraging existing platforms such as Amazon or Alibaba, for instance. And last but not least, I would encourage businesses to look at chatbots, which Paulo just mentioned a little earlier. They can help tremendously from a customer experience perspective. They work in conjunction with AI, and you can integrate them into your business processes through APIs.
Right, so in conclusion, manufacturers and distributors even already have the tools within their reach that can help avoid future disruptions. They just need to seek them out, invest and implement them. Cindy, do you have any closing thoughts?
I do. The global pandemic has impacted every company on the planet, although in many different ways. Some shut down, some accelerated their business, some were forced to pivot their businesses. But we all have one common issue. We all face an unprecedented level of uncertainty. But there's one thing that's certain, and that's as the communication and interaction around the world continues down the path of becoming more digital, more virtual. Cloud computing and advanced technology that supports connectivity, collaboration, automation, and agility all step out of the realm of nice to have and become table stakes necessary to survive and thrive.
I think that's very true. Thanks, Cindy. Laura, Paulo, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I would say now, more than ever before, businesses really just need to roll up their sleeves and tackle the digital transformation challenge head on. It can seem overwhelming, and we hear that a lot, but it really doesn't have to be. You can start small and then just build on your strategy. But at the end of the day, it's going to take your manufacturing and distribution operations to the next level. There's just so many benefits. You'll have more ability to innovate more quickly, to shorten your time to market, and prevent wastage by storing less inventory. The benefits really just do go on. And long term, you'll just get a more efficient and future-proof supply chain.
I'm going to echo certainly what Laura pointed out, and just to provide a little bit of guidance as to how do you go about this digital transformation journey. So first, I think it's important for every manufacturer and distributor to picture their digital future. And how should they go about doing this? And we often get asked that question. Well, firstly, it's an outcomes-based answer. For our customers to become future ready, we work with them and we consider the digital changes to their enterprises primarily on two dimensions. The first is the customer experience, and the second is their operational efficiency. The second point is we then apply a technology lens. What emerging and innovative technologies are best suited to solve the historical inefficiencies? For example, when considering the shop floor, the diagram that we had illustrated before, which digitalization techniques are best suited to achieve the outcome? Thirdly, we also need to consider the connectedness and the frictionless aspects of a modern business digital platform. So what areas of process or data friction are they experiencing now? What do they need to overcome? What silos require to be removed and integrated into? And the best means to engage with all the stakeholders. And lastly, it's more than just the provision of systems and technologies, but it's an equal part of how SYSPRO works with our customers as trusted partners along this journey. We have the experience, the industry specialization, and know-how on how to do that. And our focus is on the continued enrichment of our ecosystem to deliver on these aspects.
Well, thank you, everyone. So ERP can support manufacturers to help digitalize by providing solutions that resolve the biggest areas of impact: remote workforce enablement, automation of the business systems, the handling of procurement and sourcing policies, as well as provide real-time analytics to support guided decision-making. So while there's been this downtime, manufacturers have grown to realize that there's an opportunity right in front of them to invest and thrive into the future by embracing digital solutions, or digital transformation, as the buzzword continues on. SYSPRO ERP has a long track record of delivering transformational industry solutions, and for this reason, SYSPRO is constantly highly ranked as one of the world's top ERP solutions. SYSPRO remains the longest standing privately owned vendor of ERP solutions in the world, operating in over 60 countries across 6 continents and have over 600 employees. Just like to thank Cindy, Laura, and Paolo for joining me today. Thank you very much, everybody.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.